Apparently, restaurants think we're one brain cell away from believing anything, which is bold, considering half of us can Google things. Yet here we are, still swallowing nonsense with our appetizers. And trust me, the lies only get dumber from here. 1. The myth that if the menu says fresh, it must actually be fresh survives because people desperately want to believe restaurants operate like charming farmers markets instead of refrigerated logistics hubs. The word itself has been stretched so thin it could double as cling film, slapped onto everything from fish older than your phone contract to produce so well-traveled it qualifies for airline miles. Yet customers cling to the fantasy like it's emotional comfort food, imagining noble chefs gently washing vegetables at dawn while reality is basically a time capsule sealed in plastic wrap. The sarcasm writes itself because fresh now means whatever a marketing department feels spiritually connected to at the moment, and people continue accepting it because the alternative involves acknowledging they paid $17 for lettuce with the same passport stamps as a K-pop star. 2. The belief that restaurant salads are always the healthy choice persists because the word salad has tricked society into thinking anything green is a moral achievement, even when it's buried under enough dressing to qualify as a dairy product. Restaurants adore this illusion, using it to transform what is essentially a bowl of ranch with decorative leaves into a nutritional triumph, while diners congratulate themselves for ordering something light that contains more calories than a small parade float. It's an elegant scam. Pair lettuce with cheese, bacon, fried bread, candied nuts, and a dressing poured with the generosity of a medieval feast. And suddenly, people behave like they've done their cardiovascular duty for the next decade, unaware that the only truly healthy part of the dish was the moment. They considered not ordering it. 3. The myth that expensive ingredients automatically mean better food thrives because humans adore the idea that money equals quality, even when the dish tastes like an existential crisis served on artisanal porcelain. Restaurants exploit this beautifully by pairing everyday items with luxury words: truffle, heritage, reserve, single origin, as if vocabulary itself adds flavor, and diners happily pretend to detect notes of sophistication in what is essentially a perfectly average meal wearing a fancy hat. The comedy lies in how willingly people participate, swirling, sniffing, and nodding like sommeliers of delusion, while the kitchen quietly sprinkles microscopic quantities of the expensive ingredient just to keep the story intact, proving that taste buds are no match for the overwhelming power of economic peer pressure. 4. The idea that the louder the sizzle, the better the flavor remains beloved because customers interpret auditory violence as culinary skill, mistaking steam and grease explosions for signs of quality rather than a physics demonstration sponsored by hot metal. Restaurants know exactly what they're doing. Deliver a dish that enters the room sounding like it's fighting for its life, and suddenly everyone believes it's premium, even if the noise is just moisture evaporating in panic. The funniest part is watching diners lean back in awe as if witnessing high art, unaware that the sizzling doesn't add flavor, nutrition, or sophistication, just drama, heat, and the faint possibility of a lawsuit if someone leans too close. 5. The myth that bigger portions mean better value is fueled by the same human instinct that makes people hoard hotel toiletries, convincing diners that quantity is a personal victory over economic oppression. Restaurants love this because it lets them charge more while serving meals the size of geological formations, disguising excess as generosity. Customers then heroically battle through these edible mountains, insisting it's a bargain even as they enter a food coma that requires strategic breathing. The irony is that these oversized portions aren't a celebration of abundance. They're a psychological trap designed to make people believe they're winning, when in reality their digestive systems are losing dramatically. 6. The belief that the chef knows best, so don't question anything, rests on the romantic fantasy that every chef is an artist, sage, and culinary oracle wrapped into one, rather than a very tired human trying to get through a dinner rush without setting anything on fire. Restaurants encourage this myth because it transforms basic decisions, like adding extra salt, into forbidden acts of disrespect, creating an aura of mystical authority around dishes that might be brilliant or might just be aggressively average. Diners then silently suffer through flavors they hate because they've been taught that voicing preferences is an insult to the chef's genius, turning personal taste into an act of rebellion and making a simple meal feel like an audition for a very pretentious cult. 7. The myth that if something is labeled gluten-free, it must be healthier for everyone spreads like a wellness gospel, despite having all the scientific rigor of a fortune cookie. Restaurants lean into this because the label turns ordinary food into a premium lifestyle product, allowing them to charge more for the same item with one ingredient swapped. Diners then pretend they can feel the purity coursing through their bodies while consuming sugar, fat, and calories completely untouched by gluten's mystical absence. It's less about health and more about the seductive power of a category that sounds virtuous. Even though removing gluten from a brownie doesn't turn it into a carrot, it just turns it into a more expensive brownie. 8. The idea that sugar-free desserts are practically guilt-free thrives because people crave the loophole, a magical dessert that defeats biology while still tasting like happiness. Restaurants adore this myth because it lets them sell plates of chemically optimistic pastries cloaked in the illusion of responsibility, as if artificial sweeteners have the power to rewrite metabolism. Customers cling to it because it allows them to eat dessert without admitting they are, in fact, eating dessert, no matter how aggressively the plate tries to tell them otherwise. The irony is that these treats often contain enough fats and stabilizers to power a mid-sized spacecraft, making the sugar absence about as meaningful as taking the batteries out of a smoke alarm and calling the house fire-safe. 9. The myth that if the dish has vegetables in it, it's balanced, persists because humans love scoring points for effort, even when the effort is just 2 lonely peas drowning in a sea of cream sauce. Restaurants keep the myth alive because it lets them disguise indulgence as self-care, sprinkling microgreens onto caloric juggernauts like nutritional confetti. Diners then point proudly at the token vegetables as if they're evidence in a dietary courtroom, ignoring the fact that the greens have the same impact on health as decorating a donut with a single blueberry. The comedic tragedy is that both sides know the vegetables are playing a cameo role, and yet everyone continues pretending they're co-stars. 10. The belief that if the menu lists ingredients in detail, the dish must be fancy is the restaurant industry's favorite linguistic magic trick. Customers see a paragraph describing basil dew kissed at sunrise and think sophistication instead of marketing copy written by someone fueled on espresso and deceit. Restaurants exploit this by creating menus that read like dramatic literature, turning 3 basic components into an epic tale of sourcing, heritage, and emotional resonance. Diners feel elevated simply by pronouncing the ingredients, even when the final product tastes suspiciously similar to something they've made at home accidentally. The myth survives because people trust beautiful words, forgetting that eloquence doesn't guarantee flavor. It just guarantees you'll feel too intimidated to admit everything tasted vaguely like oregano. 11. The myth that food cooked slowly is automatically better persists because the phrase slow cooked evokes rustic charm, crackling hearths, and culinary wisdom passed down from ancestors who definitely did not have microwaves. Restaurants capitalize on this romantic vision, slapping slow cooked onto dishes that were either braised for an hour or simply reheated with extra emotional commitment. Diners willingly accept the myth because it transforms waiting into virtue, making them feel patient and cultured rather than just hungry. The truth, of course, is that slow cooking can elevate or destroy food, but the myth refuses. Nuance, insisting that time is a magic ingredient instead of a measurement, leaving customers to savor the illusion more than the meal. 12. The belief that the chef's special is always special survives because people assume chefs express their deepest artistry through whatever item is highlighted in a decorative frame. In reality, the special often signals ingredients approaching the existential deadline known as inventory turnover. Restaurants depend on the myth because it moves stock faster than a clearance sale disguised as a celebration, and diners embrace it because choosing the special feels adventurous and exclusive, as though they're being granted access to a culinary secret. The comedy is that customers proudly order the one dish the kitchen would genuinely love to stop seeing every time they open the fridge. 13. The myth that a longer menu means more variety flourishes because humans instinctively equate choice with quality, ignoring the logistical nightmare of expecting one kitchen to master everything from sushi to lasagna to moral despair. Restaurants sometimes weaponize this illusion by offering menus longer than political memoirs, filled with dishes that clearly haven't been prepared since the previous fiscal quarter. Diners then stare at the pages like archaeologists uncovering forgotten civilizations, mistaking the sheer volume of options for culinary ambition instead of chaos. The irony is that the more a menu tries to be everything, the more it becomes nothing, except a warning sign disguised as convenience. 14. The idea that low-fat dishes are inherently healthy thrives because people love the moral purity of removing fat, even if it means replacing it with sugar, stabilizers, and enough salt to preserve a mammoth. Restaurants count on this myth because low-fat sounds like a promise of virtue rather than a rearrangement of nutritional sins, and diners eagerly applaud themselves for ordering it, unaware that they've traded one indulgence for another with equal or greater commitment to cardiovascular drama. The myth endures because it allows everyone to pretend science has been defeated by marketing, giving customers moral permission to enjoy dessert disguised as penance. 15. The belief that a plate with fancy presentation means superior flavor endures because humans are easily seduced by food arranged like a modern art exhibit, mistaking height, swirls, and edible flowers for actual culinary talent. Restaurants adore this myth because a drizzle of sauce and a strategically placed herb can make even the most underwhelming dish appear ready for a museum. Diners, hypnotized by aesthetics, convince themselves they taste nuance that simply isn't there, performing mental gymnastics to justify the price of a meal that looks like a photo shoot and tastes like an afterthought. The comedy lies in the universal agreement to pretend that beauty guarantees flavor, when often the prettiest dishes are just architectural triumphs masking emotional emptiness. 16. The myth that if something is marked seasonal, it must be special survives because people hear the word and immediately imagine farmers singing folk songs while harvesting produce straight into the chef's open hands, when really, seasonal often means the supplier had a surplus and the restaurant politely panicked. Diners nod wisely, pretending they can taste the changing weather like culinary meteorologists, though half the time the only season influencing the dish is the season of excess inventory. Restaurants adore this myth because it lets them pass off logistical improvisation as poetic cuisine, sprinkling menu descriptions with phrases like "celebrating nature's rhythm" to distract from the fact that the rhythm in question was a shipping error. The whole dance is a delightful cycle of overconfidence, customers acting like they've detected the essence of autumn in a root, vegetable that's been stored long enough to develop personality, and restaurants pretending they orchestrated the harvest themselves despite having the same relationship to farming as they do to quantum physics. 17. The belief that if the bread is warm, it's fresh thrives, because humans have an ancient instinct that warmth equals life, blissfully ignoring the existence of microwaves, warming drawers, and staff members with zero emotional attachment to the truth. Restaurants capitalize on this delightful vulnerability by reheating bread with the solemnity of a religious ritual, transforming day-old loaves into symbols of hospitality through thermal deception alone. Diners fall for it every time, tearing into the bread like a wholesome family in a commercial, unaware that the loaf was resurrected by the culinary equivalent of necromancy. The myth persists because warmth is comforting, and acknowledging the trick would force people to confront the uncomfortable truth that they are emotionally manipulated by carbohydrates, making the illusion not just profitable, but practically therapeutic for everyone involved, except the bread, which has accepted its role as a warmed-up ambassador of lies. 18. The idea that drinks with elaborate garnishes taste better sticks around because humans are easily dazzled by fruit spears, mint bouquets, and citrus wheels, engineered like tiny botanical sculptures, forgetting that the actual beverage often tastes like someone whispered the idea of flavor into a glass. Restaurants love this myth because decorations cost pennies and create photo opportunities, tricking customers into believing a drink is premium simply because it arrives with enough foliage to register as a small ecosystem. Diners then marvel at the artistry, ignore the mediocrity, and proudly sip their overpriced beverage because it makes them feel festive, sophisticated, or at least too distracted to notice the recipe hasn't changed since the invention of sugar. Ultimately, the garnish becomes a distraction strategy so powerful that people willingly overlook the fact that the most flavorful part of the drink is the melting ice, and even that has more personality than whatever the bartender just poured with theatrical confidence. 19. The myth that Anything described as house-made must be superior survives purely because people love imagining a chef handcrafting sauces like a medieval artisan instead of envisioning the reality. A large plastic container, a whisk, and a hope that no one asks questions. Restaurants exploit the emotional power of the phrase because it transforms the simplest recipe, sometimes just pre-mixed ingredients stirred with enthusiasm, into a symbol of authenticity. Diners eagerly believe it, picturing secret techniques and grandmotherly wisdom infused into every spoonful, never suspecting that house-made could simply mean we combined two things we already had. The brilliance of the myth is that it elevates even the most mundane condiment into an artisanal masterpiece, creating a shared fantasy where everyone pretends culinary magic is happening just out of sight, while the kitchen quietly celebrates the world's easiest marketing miracle. A label that convinces people flavor is a family tradition instead of an efficient shortcut. 20. The belief that if a server confidently recommends something, it must be amazing persists because people instinctively trust enthusiasm, even when that enthusiasm has been professionally mandated by management, who probably selected the item based on profit margins rather than culinary transcendence. Diners cling to the idea that servers act as impartial guides to gastronomic enlightenment rather than the reality. They're nudging customers toward dishes that either cost too much to store any longer or too little to prepare. The myth is charming, though, because it lets people believe they're part of an insider club receiving privileged intel instead of participants in a very polite sales pitch. Restaurants rely on this dynamic because it transforms business strategy into personal connection, leaving customers convinced their server has studied their soul and chosen the perfect meal, when in truth the only thing being read is the nightly upsell list taped discreetly next to the register. 21. The myth that spicy food means authentic food thrives because humans love to turn heat into cultural currency, insisting that intensity equals legitimacy and that suffering is the highest form of culinary respect. Restaurants lean into this beautifully by offering spice levels calibrated not to tradition, but to the dramatic needs of customers who want to feel brave without requiring a medical evacuation. Diners then judge dishes not by flavor, but by their ability to generate tears, gasps, and existential doubt, all while claiming spiritual connection to cuisines they barely understand. The entire spectacle reduces centuries of cooking traditions to a competitive sport where the only prize is digestive regret. But the myth survives because people love a challenge, and nothing inflates confidence faster than believing pain is a sign of authenticity rather than a sign that someone added chili powder until it became a dare. 22. The belief that the chef's knife skills indicate food quality thrives on television logic. If someone can chop an onion fast enough to trigger a small windstorm, then surely the rest of the meal is flawless. Restaurants happily benefit from this mythology because dramatic slicing convinces customers they're witnessing artistry, distracting them from questioning anything else. Diners, meanwhile, equate blade speed with brilliance, ignoring the uncomfortable truth that knife skills are like handwriting. Impressive to look at, but irrelevant to flavor. The myth persists because it taps into humanity's love of spectacle, turning basic preparation into a form of culinary martial arts and hypnotizing audiences into thinking they tasted something exceptional simply because they watched someone reduce a cucumber to confetti at high velocity, proving once again that presentation isn't just plating, it's performance. 23. The idea that dessert is optional remains one of the most persistent restaurant myths, fueled by the pretense that diners possess self-control after consuming 3 courses, 2 drinks, and a breadbasket that might as well have been printed with the word denial. Restaurants nurture this illusion by offering dessert menus with polite restraint, quietly knowing most customers will crumble like the crust they're about to order. Diners pretend they might skip it, engaging in dramatic internal monologues before inevitably surrendering to sugar-based destiny. The myth hangs around because pretending to resist dessert makes people feel virtuous for 5 seconds, which is just long enough to justify ordering something. That could double as both a meal and a life decision, proving that in the culinary world, dessert is only optional in theory, not in human nature. 24. The myth that "You can taste the passion" lives on because people desperately want to romanticize their dining experiences, imagining the chef pouring emotion into each dish like a dramatic monologue, instead of pouring ingredients into a pan while suppressing existential dread. Restaurants encourage this delusion by describing dishes as crafted with love, a phrase that works because no one wants to picture the far more accurate emotional landscape of stress, fatigue, and mild kitchen chaos. Diners then close their eyes and claim they can sense the devotion, as if love caramelizes at a measurable temperature. The humor lies in how everyone mutually agrees to pretend that feelings season food more than salt does, when in reality the only passion detectable in the meal is the customer's passionate desire to believe in something poetic before returning to their extremely unpoetic daily routine. 25. The belief that food tastes better when eaten out persists because restaurants have mastered the art of psychological seasoning, turning lighting, music, and atmosphere into invisible flavor enhancers, while diners happily attribute the effect to superior cooking. The myth thrives because eating outside the home feels like an occasion, even when the dish is identical to something easily made in a kitchen with fewer fire hazards. Restaurants benefit immensely, knowing that ambiance can rescue even the most mediocre plate, while diners convince themselves they're tasting sophistication rather than the placebo effect wrapped in mood lighting. The truth is that food eaten out feels better not because of technique, but because humans are easily manipulated by soft lighting and not having to do dishes. A combination so powerful it can transform a basic sandwich into what people sincerely describe as an experience. 26. The myth that fusion cuisine means innovation survives because diners love the fantasy of culinary boundary breaking, imagining bold chefs dismantling tradition with creative genius rather than merging leftover ingredients into a dish that confuses everyone involved. Restaurants fuel this by giving fusion dishes poetic names that distract from the fact that some combinations exist simply because no one could find the original recipe. Customers then rave about the creativity, afraid to admit they have no idea how to evaluate something that tastes like two ideas colliding at high speed. The comedy is that true innovation is rare, but labeling anything as fusion instantly transforms uncertainty into sophistication, making diners feel adventurous while they unknowingly participate in a gastronomic version of a blind date arranged by chaos. 27. The idea that if a restaurant has a signature dish, it must be their best dish clings to the cultural belief that specialization equals excellence, even though signature dishes are often just the items the restaurant is too committed or too stubborn to remove from the menu. Restaurants present them with ceremonial reverence, implying legendary status, while diners treat them like sacred rites of passage. The myth thrives because people like narratives. The dish that built the restaurant, the masterpiece forged through time and triumph, when in reality, it might be the first recipe they managed to standardize without disaster. Everyone plays along, declaring the dish iconic simply because it's been marketed that way, proving that repetition, not greatness, is often what makes something unforgettable. 28. The belief that if the place is crowded, the food must be good, functions like a psychological domino effect. Humans see other humans and assume those humans made informed decisions, a pattern that has historically led to many questionable outcomes. Restaurants adore this dynamic because once a crowd forms, it becomes self-sustaining, turning foot traffic into a culinary endorsement regardless of what's actually being served. Diners, meanwhile, trust the mob more than their own senses, willingly waiting an hour for a meal they might not enjoy simply because strangers created an illusion of demand. The myth lingers because popularity feels like proof, even though crowds have gathered for far worse things throughout human history, which should be enough evidence that volume and quality are not synonyms. 29. The myth that if the kitchen is open concept, the food must be higher quality persists because diners equate visibility with honesty, imagining that the chef would never dare serve anything subpar while being watched, even though the view offered is carefully curated, showing only the picturesque parts of culinary chaos. Restaurants use this myth brilliantly, revealing just enough of the kitchen to imply transparency while keeping the messy reality tucked safely behind strategic walls. Diners then watch the theatrical choreography with wide-eyed admiration, convinced they're witnessing the inner sanctum rather than a staged performance. The entire dynamic works because humans instinctively trust what they can see. forgetting that the most questionable decisions always happen off stage, and open kitchens are designed to distract, not confess. 30. The belief that if a dish has a story, it must be better endures because people crave narratives almost as much as they crave carbohydrates. Restaurants exploit this brilliantly by attaching elaborate lore to dishes, turning simple ingredients into protagonists of emotional sagas. Diners fall for it because they want to feel connected to something grander than lunch, proudly reciting the tale as though it adds flavor molecules to the meal. The myth persists because stories make people feel wise, cultured, or at least temporarily interesting, even though the origin story often has as much historical accuracy as a theme park. In the end, the dish tastes exactly the same with or without lore, but everyone pretends otherwise because believing you're part of a culinary legend is far more satisfying than acknowledging you're just eating food with good marketing. 31. The idea that if a meal is labeled authentic, it must represent the true essence of the cuisine thrives because people want their dining experiences to feel like cultural exploration rather than nighttime snacking. Restaurants rely on this because authentic is a magical word that means everything and nothing simultaneously, allowing them to serve idealized versions of dishes tailored to local expectations while insisting they're delivering the real deal. Diners then congratulate themselves for experiencing cultural depth even when the dish has been redesigned for convenience, cost, or the collective fear of unfamiliar seasoning. The myth survives because authenticity is subjective, and customers prefer the version that flatters them, creating a cycle where restaurants serve fantasies and diners happily consume them. Because sometimes the illusion of authenticity tastes better than the real thing. And there you have it, the grand buffet of culinary nonsense. Now go argue in the comments about which myth was the dumbest, and subscribe before restaurants invent a new one.